Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And we're going to be talking about some spooky stuff this week, some ghost towns, specifically Centralia in Pennsylvania. Last week, I had done some Bigfoot sightings from Pennsylvania, and we talked about Columbia County. And I mentioned Centralia. I said I'd be talking about it this week. So here we are talking about Centralia. And it's very sort of little known ghost town. I've seen some videos about it on YouTube. Uh, I had never really heard about it before until about a year ago. Not that I follow ghost towns too much, but I think they're pretty cool. And since I'm on a Pennsylvania kick lately and going to Pennsylvania, I'm actually going to be in Pennsylvania as you're listening to this. This episode, I'm recording this about a week ahead of time because I'm going to be in Pennsylvania. We're going to a rent fair. We're going to Knoebels. It was a good week for me to get away, so I'm managing to get away out of the city, going to Pennsylvania with the lovely Rebecca. And we're doing a rent fair, like I said, and then we're going to Knoebels, which is like this amusement park campground. It's not quite the camping I usually do. It's a little bit more civilized with sinks and running water and cabins. We're going to be tent camping, but it's up on a platform. So no deep woods stuff. But the amusement park has this haunted mansion ride, haunted house ride. Hey, everybody, future Jason jumping in here because I made a mistake in the episode as I was recording it. It is not the Haunted Mansion. I did this whole thing about the Haunted Mansion. I put pictures in here saying that that's what referenced Centralia at Knoebels. I'm wearing my Knoebels hat, which is awesome. It is not the Haunted Mansion. It is a ride called the Black Diamond, and it is very similar to the Haunted Mansion. It is basically a haunted house type ride. It's like a little roller coaster sort of thing. Not really a roller coaster, very mild roller coaster, but goes through the dark. And there's skeletons and old dead prospectors, and they're in the anthracite mines. And it's spooky and creepy and scary. And it's basically a haunted house, which is where my confusion came from. Because there is a haunted mansion ride at Knoebels, but there's also the Black Diamond. And they're both, like I said, a kind of haunted house attraction, but the Black Diamond is more the anthracite coal mines. And it does reference Centralia. There is a part where you're kind of coming up and you see the sign for Centralia and the mining town, and it references the fire underground, which you'll probably seeing here if you're watching on YouTube. I got a little video from the ride just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. But we had a blast at Knoebels. And that's kind of why I was doing this episode, because it's near Centralia, and Rebecca had mentioned that the Black Diamond had mentioned Centralia, and I wanted to kind of tie that all in. And I'm glad I can kind of come back and edit this episode now that we've been to Knoebels. And as I mentioned real quick, while I was away, I put this on social media, Instagram and Facebook. I had to go to the emergency room while we were out there on Tuesday. So we're at Knoebels, we're camping. I had, really bad abdominal pain that I've been having for a few weeks. And the always lovely, always amazing Rebecca took me to the ER on her vacation. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Love you. But she was a trooper, she just didn't bat an eye, took me to the ER, teased me a little bit, but she always does. But I got it all sorted out. I'm fine. It was just a little bout of colitis, and they gave me some meds, and I'm fine. But it's a little concerning when you have, pains like that, especially when you're 50 like me now, and you're out in the woods and you're camping, and, you got to get these things checked out. So I went and got it checked out, and we were back in the park in time for dinner. I mean, it was a wonderful experience. We went to the Geisinger emergency room in Shamokin, and the staff there were amazing and got me triage, blood work, application. I mean, again, from the time I got there to the time I got out, 3 hours and 45 minutes maybe, which in the city, like 4 hours in, I'd still be filling out paperwork. But I was tested, CAT scanned, released, with meds within 4 hours. So beautiful, beautiful country out there in Pennsylvania, Shamokin, beautiful town. The hospital was amazing. The staff were amazing, just so friendly and so courteous. And, if you got to go to the ER, that was the best way for me to do it. But like I said, we were back in the park by like 4 p.m., having pulled pork and ice cream and going on rides like the Black Diamond and the Phoenix. Check out Knoebels if you guys are in the area. It's a great little amusement park, very affordable, lots of fun, family friendly, dog friendly. But I'm going to get you guys back to Centralia. This is just my little way of correcting my stupid error of saying the Haunted Mansion when I really meant the Black Diamond, and the Black Diamond is awesome. So let's get back to Centralia and some ghost towns. Right. And it kind of takes you through the anthracite mines and the coal mines because Pennsylvania is known for its coal. And they mention Centralia, and it's a part of the ride. And Rebecca suggested that I talk about this since we're going to be in Knoebels and dealing with anthracite. I think they have like a little anthracite museum in there as well. For all you Office fans, you've probably heard Dwight talk about taking Angela to the anthracite museum. Fun times. Um, so yeah, we're going to Knoebels. We're going to be doing that. But I figured I'd talk a little bit about Centralia because it is this ghost town, modern day ghost town. There's some weird things about it. It's not just abandoned, and we're going to get to some of the details shortly about why it is different from most other ghost towns, which are just simply towns that nobody lives in anymore. They're ghost towns. People have left for whatever reason, usually because the gold mining isn't good anymore or whatever other reason. But this one has a very interesting bit of trivia attached to it. So we will get to that. There are no ghosts that I could find, no spooky stories about the town other than it just being kind of like the spooky thing that exists in our world that most people are unaware of. And once we get into the details, you'll understand why it's interesting. But I couldn't really find any ghost stories about this ghost town, though some murders and crime did happen there. So I'm sure maybe there's something out there, just nothing I could really find. I did find a Bigfoot sighting or two out there in the county, not necessarily in Centralia, but it's there. So let's get to Centralia. So I'm going to be pulling a lot of the information for Centralia from Wikipedia. It's just got everything kind of in one cool little place. And I think some of the sort of out there sites, the paranormal sites, the urban exploration sites, they kind of get some details wrong. So I wanted to kind of stick with this just to have one source and not jump all over the place. So quickly, Centralia is located in Columbia County in eastern Pennsylvania. And the land that makes up Centralia was sold to colonials in 1749 for 500 pounds. And in 1770, during the construction of the Reading Road, which stretched from Reading to Fort Augusta, which is present day Sunbury, settlers surveyed and explored the land. A large portion of Reading Road was developed later as Route 61, the main highway east into and south of Centralia. In 1793, Robert Morris, a hero of the Revolutionary War and signatory of the Declaration of Independence, acquired a third of Centralia's valley land. When he declared bankruptcy in 1798, the land was surrendered to the Bank of the United States. A French sea captain named Stephen Girard purchased Morris's lands for $30,000, including 68 tracts east of Morris's. He had learned that there was anthracite coal in the region. So this comes into play later because the coal under the town makes it very valuable, but it is also sort of its downfall. So the mining really began. First two mines in Centralia opened in 1856, the Locust Run mine and the Coal Ridge mine. So some more mines came later, the Centralia mine in 1862, the Hazeldale Colliery mine in 1860, the Continental mine in 1863, Gettysburg. Centralia was incorporated as a borough in 1866. Its principal employer was the anthracite coal industry, as I said. And here's where we get to some juicy little tidbits. Alexander Ray, the town's founder, was murdered in his buggy by members of the Molly Maguires on October 17th, 1868, during a trip between Centralia and Mount Carmel. 3 men were eventually convicted of his death and were hanged in the county seat of Bloomsburg on March 25th, 1878. And for anybody who's not sure, the Molly Maguires, I will link to this in the description below, but they were like this secret society based out of Ireland, kind of shady. So, but I don't want to get distracted here and off track. So back to Centralia. Several other murders and incidents of arson also took place during the violence, as Centralia was a hotbed of Molly Maguire's activity during the 1860s to organize a mine workers union in order to improve wages and working conditions. So again, back then you had a lot of Irish immigrants working on railroads and other tasks, the mines, things like that. So they were trying to unionize. A legend among locals in Centralia tells that Father Daniel Ignatius McDermott, the first Roman Catholic priest to call Centralia home, cursed the land in retaliation for being assaulted by 3 members of the Maguires in 1869. McDermott said there would be a day when St. Ignatius Roman Catholic Church would be the only structure remaining in Centralia. Many of the Molly Maguire's leaders were hanged in 1877, ending their crimes. Legends say that a number of descendants of the Molly Maguires still lived in Centralia up until the 1980s. Interesting. According to numbers of federal census records, the town of Centralia reached its maximum population of 2,761 in 1890. At its peak, the town had 7 churches, 5 hotels, 27 saloons, 2 theaters, a bank, a post office, and 14 general and grocery stores. 37 years later, the production of anthracite coal had reached its peak in Pennsylvania. In the following years, production declined as many young miners from Centralia enlisted in the military when the U.S. entered World War I. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Coal mining continued in Centralia until the 1960s, when most of the companies shut down. Bootleg mining continued until 1982, and strip and open pit mining are still active in the area. An underground mine about 3 miles to the west employs about 40 people. Rail service ended in 1966. Centralia operated its own school district, including elementary schools and a high school, also 2 Catholic parochial schools. By 1980, it had 1,012 residents. Another 500 or 600 lived nearby. So here's where we get to the really interesting part of Centralia. Again, it's a ghost town, mining. No one really lives there anymore. It's a ghost town. It's deserted. But the interesting thing about it is that in May of 1962, and I'll get into some details here, but a fire started in the mines and spread through the mines under the town, and it is still burning to this day. So think about that. 1962, it is now burning, 62 years later. Incredible. And estimates say it could burn from anywhere from another 250 to 500 years, depending on how quickly it spreads and how much coal is actually down there. So let me get into how this fire started, or how they think it started, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So to talk about the mine fire, analysts disagree about the specific cause of the Centralia fire. David DeCock, author of Fire Underground, The Ongoing Tragedy of the Centralia Mine Fire, concluded that it started with an attempt to clean up the town landfill. In May of 1962, the Centralia Borough Council hired 5 members of the volunteer fire department to clean up the town landfill located in an abandoned strip mine pit next to the Oddfellows Cemetery, just outside the borough limits. This had been done prior to Memorial Day in previous years when the landfill was in a different location. So to start, this was fairly standard procedure. This is just kind of what they did. They burned garbage to make room for more garbage. And this is just something they did. It was a very sort of routine thing for them to do, which I'll get into here. So on May 27th, 1962, the firefighters, as they had in the past, set the dump on fire and let it burn for some time. Unlike in previous years, however, the fire was not fully extinguished. An unsealed opening in the pit allowed the fire to enter the labyrinth of abandoned coal mines beneath Centralia. So this is the prevailing theory. Again, we may never know, but this does make the most sense. And we'll get into some other thoughts on this. But now you have this coal burning underground. You can't get people down there to put this fire out, and it's just spreading very quickly because it's coal. So to continue, by contrast, other sources claim that the fire had started the previous day when a trash hauler dumped hot ash or coal discarded from coal burners into the open trash pit. The author of The Day the Earth Caved In noted that Borough Council minutes from June 4th, 1962, referred to 2 fires at the dump, and that 5 firefighters had submitted bills for, quote, fighting the fire at the landfill area. The borough, by law, was responsible for installing a fire-resistant clay barrier between each layer of the landfill, but fell behind schedule, leaving the barrier incomplete. This allowed the hot coals to penetrate the coal seam underneath the pit and start the subsequent subterranean fire. Another theory proposes that the Bast Colliery Fire of 1932 was never fully extinguished, and that fire reached the landfill area by 1962. However, a miner named Frank Jurgel Sr. disputes that theory. Jurgel claims he operated a bootleg mine with his brother near the landfill from 1960 to 62. If the Bast Colliery Fire had not been extinguished, the brothers would likely have been overcome or killed by the noxious gases via many interconnected tunnels in the area. So a couple of different theories, somebody disputing it. I think we can all agree that somebody messed up. Somebody started a fire near the garbage, whether it was the firefighters, whether it was the hot coals, whether it was a fire from 1932. I don't know if it would take 30 years for that fire to reach levels where it was noticed by the town people. I mean, that's a long time. So I think one of the first two theories is probably the most likely, if not a combination of the two. So very interesting. But let's talk about why it's a ghost town now. So the immediate effects. In 1979, locals became aware of the scale of the problem when a gas station owner, then Mayor John Coddington, inserted a dipstick into one of his underground tanks to check the fuel level. When he withdrew it, it seemed hot. He lowered a thermometer into the tank on a string and was shocked to discover that the temperature of the gasoline in the tank was 172 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's 77.8 degrees Celsius for anybody outside of the good old USA here. Statewide attention to the fire began to increase, culminating on February 14th, 1981, when a 12-year-old resident named Tom Statewide attention to the fire began to increase, culminating on February 14th, 1981, when a 12-year-old resident named Todd Dombowski fell into a sinkhole 4 feet wide by 150 feet deep that suddenly opened beneath his feet in his grandmother's backyard, but he saved himself by grabbing onto a tree root. His cousin, 14-year-old Eric Wolfgang, pulled Dombowski out of the hole to safety. The plume of hot steam billowing from the hole was tested and found to contain a lethal level of carbon monoxide. At the time of the sinkhole collapse, U.S. Representative James Nelligan and Governor Dick Thornburgh were visiting the town to assess the area. So you have these, high-level politicians in town when this sinkhole opens. This boy is just out in his grandmother's yard, playing or, in the grass or whatever, and this sinkhole opens up 150 feet. I mean, this kid would have died if he didn't grab onto the tree root. So thank God he did. Although there was physical, visible evidence of the fire, residents of Centralia were bitterly divided over the question of whether or not the fire posed a direct threat to the town. In The Real Disaster is Above Ground, Steve Kroll Smith and Steve Couch identified at least 6 community groups, each organized around varying interpretations of the amount and kind of risk posed by the fire. In 1983, the U.S. Congress allocated more than $42 million for relocation efforts. Nearly all of the residents accepted the government's buyout offers. More than 1,000 people moved out of the town, and 500 structures were demolished. By 1990, the census recorded 63 remaining residents. So you have this fire burning under the town. It's releasing toxic gas. It's heating up the ground. It's not really mentioned here, but a lot of the roads started cracking and buckling. You have sinkholes. This is not a safe place to live anymore. And by last count, and we might get to that here, but the last I heard, there's only 5 people still living in Centralia. And the government realized that the $42 million to relocate people was cheaper than fixing it, which last I heard, I think it was like 250 million or 280 million, maybe even more than that. Again, some of the info out there is contradictory and doesn't really match up, but ultimately the $42 million to relocate everybody was cheaper than fixing the problem and stopping the fire. And they had done some digging down to try to stop the fire, but by the time they reached the mine shaft, the fire had already spread past it. They were trying to sort of intercept it, and it just didn't work. So they abandoned the town. In 1992, Pennsylvania Governor Bob Casey invoked eminent domain on all property in the borough, condemning all the buildings within. A subsequent legal effort by residents to overturn the action failed. In 2002, the U.S. Postal Service discontinued Centralia's zip code 17927. Only 16 homes were still standing by 2006, which was reduced to 11 by 2009 when Governor Ed Rendell began the formal eviction of the remaining Centralia residents. Only 5 homes remained by 2010. The Centralia mine fire extended beneath the village of Burnsville, ironic, a short distance to the south, and required it also to be abandoned. So where does that leave the town today? A few homes remain standing in Centralia. Most of the abandoned buildings have been demolished by the Columbia County Redevelopment Authority or reclaimed by nature. At a casual glance, the area now appears to be a field with many paved streets running through it. Some areas are being filled with new growth forest. The remaining church in the borough, St. Mary's, holds weekly services on Sunday. I believe it's a Ukrainian church, but it's still there. It's a beautiful building. And yeah, they still have services there every Sunday. It has not yet been directly affected by the fire. Makes you wonder. The town's 4 cemeteries, including one on the hilltop, which has smoke rising around and out of it, are maintained in good condition. The only indications of the fire, which underlies some 400 acres, spreading along 4 fronts, are low round metal steam vents in the south of the borough. Several signs warn of underground fire, unstable ground, and dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. Additional smoke and steam can be seen coming from an abandoned portion of Pennsylvania Route 61, an area just behind the Hilltop Cemetery, and other cracks in the ground scattered about the area. Route 61 was repaired several times until it was closed. Like I said, the ground is cracking. It's basically an oven cooking under the town and cooking the town. So a lot of the streets are cracking, the ground is cracking and scattering, and just not a safe place to be. You get a lot of urban explorers going there, some YouTubers. There's the graffiti highway there now, so we'll talk more about what's going on. The current route was formerly a detour around the damaged portion during the repairs and became a permanent route in 1993. Mounds of dirt were placed at both ends of the former route, effectively blocking the road. Pedestrian traffic is still possible due to a small opening about 2 feet wide at the north side of the road. The underground fire is still burning, and in 2006, it was reported that it is expected to do so for another 250 years. Again, I had heard 500 from some places, but we'll go with 250. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania did not renew the location contract at the end of 2005. The last remaining house on Locust Avenue was demolished in September 2007. It was notable for a period for the 5 chimney-like support buttresses along each of the 2 opposite sides of the house. And looks like there's a picture of it right here. I'll see if I can blow this up. There you go. So yeah, it's got like 5 chimneys. Or 6. Looks like 6. The house had formerly been supported by a row of adjacent buildings. Another house with similar buttresses was visible from the northern side of the cemetery, just north of the burning, partially sun-subsumed hillside. Sorry, I can't read today. And then it says here, in April of 2020, amidst the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic, the property's current owners made the decision to cover over the graffiti on the highway section of Old Route 61. Several mounds of dirt were laid over the area, thus ending a decades-long fascination with the desolate stretch of road. And I don't know if it's still visible to this day. I've seen some people on YouTube going there, but I don't recall if that was, 4 or 5 years ago or if that was recently. I wouldn't be surprised if it, got dug out and people are still looking at it. And then, we come down to the 2020 census, which, 4 years ago, as of the census of 2020, there were 5 people residing in the borough. 1 resident, so 20% of the population, was under the age of 18. So, people want to dig in. They want to stay in their homes. They don't want to leave, which I get, but it is very dangerous. There's a lot of carbon monoxide. The ground is being baked. It's being cooked, and it could crack. It could open up. It's very dangerous. So I understand not wanting to leave your home, but at the same time, this is not safe. So this here says in 2018, cleanup included areas around the landfill and the abandoned section of Route 61, since nicknamed the Graffiti Highway. Google Maps overhead satellite view imagery, copyright dated 2023, shows the former Graffiti Highway almost entirely buried under hundreds of access denial berms. Volunteers planted 250 apple trees around Centralia to restore the town's ecosystem and wildlife habits in April 2021. The town's Ukrainian Catholic Church, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, remains in use, as I mentioned, and attracts worshippers from surrounding towns, including people who were once residents of the town. A geological survey found that there was solid rock, not coal, under the church, so it is not in danger of collapse due to the fire. An Eastern Orthodox cemetery, the Saints Peter and Paul Church and Cemetery, still stands on the southwest outskirts of Centralia. So, yeah, the Graffiti Highway, pretty much gone. So those videos I saw must have been filmed earlier. I thought they were more recent, but maybe they were filmed before the cleanup took place. And the church, as I said, is still there. It is built on rock, and there's no coal underneath it, so it is safe. And again, just makes you wonder, like, the church survives. Interesting. So very cool stuff. In popular culture, I will read about this. Centralia has been used as a model for many different fictional ghost towns and manifestations of hell. Prominent examples include Dean Koontz's Strange Highways, and David Wellington's Vampire Zero. Screenwriter Roger Avery researched Centralia while working on the screenplay for the Silent Hill film adaptation. It is, however, a common misconception that the town was an inspiration for the whole series. And that's another thing you see online. Everybody says the video games, the Silent Hill video games, which I played, they were awesome. They were freaky, scary, probably back on like my PS2. Uh, you basically, your weapon is a flashlight and you're just kind of going through this ghost town. There's this mist and this fog, and there's all sorts of like little demon babies that run at you. And it's all ambiance, it's all the sounds and what you can't see. Very cool game. But I've seen a lot of YouTubers just say that the games were inspired by it. And that's not entirely true. The movies were researched for, to get that sort of sense of a ghost town, but it wasn't an inspiration for the video games. That's a bit of a leap. So here's a bit of the graffiti highway before it was covered up. So you could see people just tons of graffiti here. The road is all cracked and destroyed. It's just from being heated. And then you have these cold winter months in Pennsylvania where the road freezes and you got, the heat coming up from under the ground. Well, actually, one of the interesting things people had said was that the roads didn't ever really freeze. The snow would melt as it hit it. So they didn't really have to do a lot of the snow plowing because the roads were like heated back in, the 60s and 70s. And but this is what you end up with. You end up with a cracked, destroyed road that you can't drive on regardless. And then people come in and spray paint all over it and, peepees and wee-wees all over it. From what I saw on YouTube, it's just not cool. And here's a drone shot of the highway here. You can zoom in a little bit. Still some graffiti on there, but apparently it's gone now. And then here's a berm. They just have the berm here to sort of block cars from going through there. I mean, people can climb up there. And if you look at this, I mean, it's clearly like a little path that people climb up and down. And again, in some of the YouTube videos I've seen, people have climbed up that to get down onto the abandoned highway there, but you can't drive on it. So that's Centralia. So a very creepy, almost unsettling that this fire is still burning, and the government, politicians, experts are just like, oh, well, let it burn, just move the people. And this natural disaster will just keep going on. It's been going on for 62 years and it'll go for another 250 or 500 or however long it's going to go for. It's just disturbing. And no ghost stories from the town, but I think that's just creepy enough. And I'm glad most of the people left. That is just a very dangerous situation to be in. I wouldn't want to have kids there. I wouldn't want to live there. I mean, the carbon monoxide, that'll kill you very quickly. And all you need is a little bit extra coming in your house one night in the winter when you have all your windows closed and you and your family are dead. It doesn't take long for carbon monoxide to kill a person. So very spooky. But I'm going to take a look at a few other ghost towns in Pennsylvania. And I'm not going to go as in depth because I don't think any of them are quite as fascinating as Centralia. But I just think a ghost town with a fire burning underneath it for 62 years that'll go on for another 200 or 300 years is really fascinating, very spooky, very odd. So let us get on to some other ghost towns. All right, so this info is coming from a website called uncoveringpa.com, and this is 7 ghost towns in Pennsylvania you can still visit. And this is just from last year, July 12th, 2023. And of course, the first one is Centralia, which we just went over. So yeah, I'm not going to go over this again. So we'll go down to the second one. This one is called Pithole or Pithole. I'm guessing it's Pithole. The community of Pithole, charming name, huh, was founded during the oil boom in northwestern Pennsylvania. Pithole was laid out in May 1865 after oil was discovered nearby. Land speculators and would-be oil barons quickly scooped up the land, and a town was built around them. By December 1865, 20,000 people called Pithole, Pennsylvania, home. At its peak, Pithole featured more than 50 hotels, 3 churches, the world's first oil pipeline, a newspaper, a theater, and a railroad. Pithole became known as a rough and tumble town reminiscent of the communities of the Wild West. I think you're going to see a lot of that in these sort of speculator towns where there's gold or oil or coal. Pithole's history was short-lived, however. As the oil boom began to wane, banks collapsed and a fire hit the community. So again, we have another fire. Pithol's population quickly collapsed with only 2,000 residents in the community by December 1866. By the census of 1870, less than 250 people lived in Pithole. Today, Pithole is just an empty field near Oil Creek State Park. A visitor center is located at the corner of town, which offers a fascinating look at this short-lived community. The old streets of Pithole are regularly mowed, allowing visitors to move through this ghost town. So it's still there, it seems like all the buildings are gone. But again, you kind of have the boom goes away and then people leave the town. There's nothing to keep people there working. And back in the late 1800s, if there was no industry there, you couldn't really survive. So interesting. But again, another fire. So, and again, not under the town, but a fire sort of caused people to leave. All right, the next one is Scotia. Located near State College, Scotia was once a mining community that supported both the nearby iron industry and later Carnegie steel operations. Today, the land that was once Scotia has been reclaimed by nature and is now part of State Game Lands 176 in Centre County. While much of this Pennsylvania ghost town has disappeared, there are still remnants if you know where to look for them. The largest still remaining area consists of several concrete buildings that once served the mining operations, as well as the old railroad grade. If you walk through the forested trails of the Scotia Barrens, you might even find more hidden ruins of this ghost town. So that's kind of my jam. I love going to the woods and finding old buildings. And sometimes they don't even have to be that old, but it is interesting to go through and just find old remnants of civilization. And like even here on Staten Island, there's this park called Conference House Park. I've done some episodes on the Conference House. But if you walk past the conference house, you take this path that you go down and then you head down towards the water. There's like a little street. There's like an old street lamp. There's a street, there's a fire hydrant, and there's like the crumbling foundation of a house. You can kind of see where the house was, but they were planning to build a little community in there. And then they decided, now we're going to keep it as a park. But the street is still there. The lamppost is still there. And in New York City, we have very big, street lights and the fire hydrant. So it's all in there. Like someone was living in there at some point and it was going to become a neighborhood. And then they said, no, we're going to keep it as a park. So I love doing that stuff, just going through the woods and finding old buildings and old abandoned evidence of civilization at one point. So the next town is called Rosh Gap. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Rosh Gap is another abandoned Pennsylvania town that got its start as a coal mining community. Located in Lebanon County near the Appalachian Trail, which the Appalachian Trail has a lot of weird stuff going on, and I'll do another episode on that at some point. Rosh Gap was formed in 1828. The community flourished, growing to as many as 1,000 residents, but was gone by 1910. Today, the ruins of the community can be found in St. Anthony's Wilderness along a great rail trail. There isn't much left of Rosh Gap, though there are a few building foundations that can be found, as well as a cemetery. So again, very cool. You can go find the building foundations. You can find the little cemetery. There's still evidence there. I mean, even when a town is abandoned, it takes years and years and years for all that stuff to disappear. You're going to find evidence that there were houses there or buildings or churches or whatever. So the next ghost town is called Yellow Dog Village. Of all the places on this list, Yellow Dog Village might be the most like what you think of when you think of ghost towns. Yellow Dog Village was constructed in Armstrong County, Pennsylvania, in the first decade of the 20th century to support the mines that were right outside of town. Even as the mines closed, the community continued until it finally became abandoned in the early 2000s. So this is a more recent abandonment of a ghost town. Today, the town's owners are maintaining it as a small farm and allow visitors to come in on select dates to explore the grounds. So again, this one is like privately held, but if you want to go in, it seems like the owners are open to people going in and exploring, where the other ones are like on state lands and in state parks. And Centralia, you could just go to. I mean, like I said, you see tons of YouTubers going there and just shooting their videos and exploring the town, going to the church. So if anyone wants to explore, you can look into that. So the next one is called Petroleum Center. Sensing a theme here. Lots of oil and coal and petroleum. Petroleum Center is another oil boom community that once thrived in northwestern Pennsylvania. Petroleum Center was founded in 1866 and was once home to as many as 3,000 people. The community even hosted President Ulysses S. Grant in 1871. However, by 1873, the town was essentially abandoned. Today, the land where Petroleum Center once sat is now part of Oil Creek State Park. The park has created a walking tour around the former center of town that showcases the history of the area. Sadly, the community has been almost completely lost, with only the old bank steps still visible from the road. So, yeah, you have these little remnants of civilization, and in this case, it's just the steps. So, very cool. And that brings us to our last ghost town in Pennsylvania called Concrete City. And this city is an abandoned town in Pennsylvania's Luzerne County. It was constructed in the early 20th century as company housing for the DL&W Railroad. There were a total of 20 duplexes in the community, so 40 carefully selected workers were chosen to move into the homes with their families. In 1924, an attempt was made to demolish the community, but the strong construction made this difficult enough that it was never done. Today, Concrete City sits abandoned and regularly draws in locals and visitors alike. While I'm unsure of the legality of visiting the site, I do know that people regularly do visit. Proceed at your own caution if you do opt to check out this site. So, another one, probably very dangerous. You have buildings that were built so strongly they couldn't be demolished in the early 1900s, but they're probably falling down now. And you don't want to walk into one of these buildings and have a huge beam of wood or slabs of concrete falling on your head. And that's just one of the dangers of urban exploration, one of the risks. You go in and a stairway can give out from under you, something can fall from the ceiling. So you got to be very careful. And again, look into the legality of this. I don't know. I'm not familiar with any of these places. I know there's some abandoned places on Staten Island that you're not supposed to go to, and I've never been. So just check these out before you go to them. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to any of these. I'd like to at some point, but they're kind of spread out across Pennsylvania. And I would like to go to Centralia at some point, so maybe I'll get there. But the other ones, I'm not too sure. There's 6 other ones that are just listed in this article, so I don't know if I'm going to get to those. But I do find ghost towns cool. Again, it's more on the urban exploration side and less the paranormal side. Again, murders happen there, sadness happen there, but I looked and I really couldn't find any ghost stories or anything paranormal or supernatural happening in these towns. And the ghost town moniker is really there just because there's no living people there. It's not that there's ghosts there. It's just, there's nobody alive there. It's abandoned. It's the remnants of a town that used to be alive that is no longer alive. So cool stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This is a little bit of a shorter one this week. It's very hot in my apartment. It's like 97 degrees or something outside today. And I need to get that air pumping a little bit higher. I thought it'd be okay during this episode, but it's very hot right now. If you guys have any stories you'd like to tell or share with me or suggestions for episodes, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. And I'm happy to speak to you and read your story on the air, or have you come on the air, or just talk about any stories that you would like me to talk about. If you know of any local legends, things that people don't really know about, kind of like Centralia, it's not really well known. Most people, I think, when they think of ghost towns, they think about like out west, the gold mining, prospecting towns. They don't really think of Pennsylvania for ghost towns. So hope you guys enjoyed. In the meantime, everybody, question everything, always question things, and we will see you next week. Rock and roll, everybody.